Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Well, today we are now in day 46 of the ongoing war between the Russian Federation and the Ukrainian forces. We continue to see fighting taking place predominantly in the southeast of the country, running from Kharkiv all the way down south towards in the eastern direction of Mykolaiv. So still a very broad front in which we are still seeing continued combat operations. Right now, the focus of Russian forces right now, and probably the most successful area that the Russian military is operating in terms of direct breakthroughs is the area of operations now just south of Izium. As we can see, a multi-pronged Russian operation now breaking out south of Izium, closing in on Sloviansk, and then obviously another segment of its forces maneuvering further to the south, kind of southwest, again looking to envelop towards the direction of Donetsk and Horlovika. But again, that is still some time off until we see that sort of maneuver operation by the Russian forces. Things are going very, very slow right now for the Russians. They're going to continue to need to deploy additional forces, reinforce forces, and bring additional forces into this area of operation in order to achieve the desired breakthrough that it is currently looking for. And we do continue to see very, very heavy fighting within this several hundred kilometer area of operations. Right now, what's going well for the Russians? What's going well for the Ukrainian forces? What is causing the Russians to have so much difficulty with the Ukrainian military? And I'm going to touch on that, and then I'm going to look at what is going well for the Ukrainian forces, or I'm sorry, the Russian forces. But first and foremost, for the Ukrainian forces, as I've talked about before, is the intel sharing that is occurring with Western states, obviously the NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and specifically the United States and the United Kingdom, in terms of intel assets that are being handed to the Ukrainian forces in real time. So as the Russian forces deploy its military in a certain direction, the Ukrainians are being actively given that information in real time. So there's probably times, I won't say probably times, there are probably many occasions where the Ukrainians have better situational awareness than the actual Russian military. Yes, the Russian military does have spy satellites. They do have certain of kind of a limited capacity in terms of early warning aircraft. They're early warning aircraft, and some of these aircraft that have the ability to detect ground movement, specifically on the ground in terms of columns of vehicles, are just not as advanced as what the United States possesses. And the United States constantly has aircraft in the air, and obviously spy satellites as well, that are looking down at the battlefield, the battlescape, and is able to tell the Ukrainians how the Russians are deploying, where the Russians are deploying, and that information is being directly transmitted to the Ukrainian military. The next piece of the equation that is really causing the Russians issue is the deployment of some of these Western weapon systems, specifically the Javelin and the NLAW. And I think we look at these systems and we kind of bunch all of these systems into one category. And when we look at the TOW, when we look at the cornet. We look at the Spandrel or Spiral, or these Russian anti-tank guided weapon systems. We kind of group them all into one category as an anti-tank guided weapon system, as opposed to grouping the Javelin and the in-law into the kind of that advanced top attack category. And what makes the Javelin and the in-law so unique is it deploys a top attack capability that is working in a very, very effective manner. 20 years ago, these top attack weapon systems were kind of in their infancy and starting to be deployed. We first saw the Bofors Bill and then the Bill 2 being deployed, and then some of that technology, while they're a different technology in terms of how the Javelin attacks, that is a fire and forget system. The in-law has a kind of a directed shape charge where it overflies the target and then fires its penetrator downwards, that molten jet, that high explosive anti-tank charge downwards on the weakest point of a main battle tank, which is the top of the turret or the rear deck of the engine compartment. But needless to say, any strike in a vertical top attack manner on a T-72 or a T-90 is resulting in catastrophic kills or a permanent mobility kill by destroying the engine compartment and quite possibly setting the tank further on fire. But what we've also seen, and in the early stages of the testing of systems such as the Bofors Bill and Bill 2, which are tandem warheads. So you have a precursor charge designed to either blow away or penetrate and make the reactive armor null and void. And what we've seen, especially during the deployment of the Bill 2 in testing, that even the precursor charge, the 40 millimeter precursor charge designed to negate the reactive armor, was at times the reactive armor was not even detonating, and the 40 millimeter precursor charge was enough to destroy the main battle tank. And now we have these systems where we're just not talking about a precursor charge. We're talking about a very large warhead that exists in the in-law, that exists in the Javelin, and many times we've seen on the current battlefield that in the case of the in-law, when it launches a top attack profile mission, that charge is going all the way through the vehicle, meaning it penetrates the top of the turret, goes through the ammunition compartment in some cases, all the way through the bottom of the tank, and then hits the surface of the earth underneath the tank. That's how powerful these directed shape charges are. And in terms of the Javelin, out of an early reported 112 Javelin launches against Russian targets, 100 out of the 112 effectively hit the Russian target. And in top attack mode, both in reference to the in-law and in reference to the Javelin, the attacks have been almost 100% successful if you have a successful strike on said Russian vehicle. And unfortunately for the Russians, a lot of resources and engineering has been spent in terms of the development of reactive armor and trying to upgrade some of these older tanks that are probably a bit underweight, with more enhanced reactive armor designed to alleviate some of these new and more advanced anti-tank guided weapon systems. And the problem is that that reactive armor in terms of this modern battlefield that we're seeing in Ukraine, specifically with the top attack profile of the in-law and the Javelin, we've almost seen a 100% kill rate on these tanks when they are hit with the top attack profile. So very successful system in terms of the Javelin and the in-law. And you just never really know how effective these systems are going to be on the battlefield until you really start to use them in mass in terms of and how you're deploying them in terms of your tactics and the type of tactics that the enemy is utilizing, in this case the Russians. And we've continued to see the Russians operate along major roadways, which are giving the Ukrainians the ability to kind of set up these anti-tank guided weapon system ambushes, and not only that, again, the whole concept of Western intel directing these Ukrainian anti-tank guided weapons teams where the Russians are maneuvering and deploying. So the Russians are probably doing the best job in some cases. I have seen some things that concern me in terms of some tactics I see on the ground in terms of the way the Russians are deploying its tanks, and I don't really understand what they're doing and why they're doing it at times. Obviously much different than American doctrine, especially when we've seen some of these ambushes take place. It's almost like they've not been trained to engage ambushes, and I think part of that is some of the distance that we're seeing. Obviously, some of this is very close distance in regards to the in-law being deployed within hundreds of meters, but at the same time, you're also seeing the Javelin being used, where you're seeing targets being hit at upwards to 2,000, 3,000 meters. And then I also have to obviously mention the Stunka and the Stunka P being utilized by the Ukrainian military, which appears to be a very effective, albeit not a top attack munition, on a side impact, a side aspect hit on a Russian vehicle. And quite frankly, we've seen direct frontal aspect hits where the Stunka P has been successful in penetrating the frontal aspect of Russian armor, unfortunately for the Russian tankers. But these systems are proving to be almost 100% effective when they actually hit the Russian vehicle, and when they are launched, we are seeing up to a 90% hit ratio when these weapon systems, especially the Javelin, which is a fire and forget system, being launched and hitting the vehicle. Now, the in-law is also proving to be a very accurate and effective weapon system, although it's not guided and kind of uses a projected line of sight a mechanism to kind of guide it to a moving target. But nonetheless, it is proving to be a much more effective instrument than a standard RPG-7 or an AT-4 type of man-portable, non-guided weapon system. But more importantly, is back to that top attack profile, where it has that magnetic sensor, and it simply just overflies the target, and it detects, the magnetic sensor detects the Russian tank or armored vehicle, and it detonates over it. And when it detonates, it's almost a 100% catastrophic and or a mobility kill in terms of those systems, and they are very, very effective. I just can't tell you just how effective these systems are, unfortunately, for the Russians. What are the Russians doing? Well, right now we're kind of seeing we're seeing modern technology, specifically drones, and we're seeing the Russians continuing to use the drones, much like they use the drones in Syria, but also in terms of giving the Russians very precise GPS or GLONASS coordinates on Ukrainian positions where Russian either tube artillery or multiple launch rocket systems can effectively hit Ukrainian targets. And right now, given the high casualty rate that the Russians have been suffering in regards to the plethora of anti-tank guided weapon systems on the battlefield, we are starting to see, and we have been seeing, the Russians starting to adapt and change tactics and starting to use its long-range fires, its artillery, its multiple launch rocket systems in a manner that is starting to reduce some of these Russian casualties and increase Ukrainian casualties. So the Russians are looking to identify Ukrainian units in the field with the use of their drones. And while the Russians don't have many drones that are used in direct strike missions, they do use their drones to identify and give very accurate information where specific Ukrainian units are. And when the Russian military then launches its artillery or multiple launch rocket system attacks against those units, they've been very effective in hitting those Ukrainian targets, especially when they use mass fires. We're starting to see the Russians also start to use some of its kamikaze drones. So the Kalashnikov concern had been developing a variety of drones kind of designed with that kamikaze attack profile, where the actual drone doesn't launch a very specific munition or missile like the Bayraktar TB2 drone launches the MAM-L missile. These specific drones used by the Russians identifies a target and then basically destroys itself by flying into it, and then usually there's a 5-pound charge inside of the drone, which also explodes. And we're seeing those now being deployed by the Russians as well. But the big issue right now, I think, for the Russians is really kind of centers on what I talked about in other videos, and that is high-end optronics. We have seen Russian K-52 attack helicopter gunships flying very, very low and attacking physical targets on the ground in close air support missions without the use of precision-guided munitions. They're coming in with unguided rockets and cannons, autocannons, and engaging Ukrainian targets at a very, very close range, which makes them susceptible to any sort of ground fire. And we've seen at least one instance, one video documented instance, where a Ka-52 was hit by ground fire because it was operating, I believe it was over Hostomel, and it was supporting the initial attack on the airbase just outside of Hostomel. And we could clearly see that in that instance, it was not using any form of advanced optronics. It was launching autocannon attacks on Ukrainian targets at very, very close range. So if you look at U.S. Deployment strategy, let's say the Apache, the AH-64 attack helicopter, usually that Apache is going to be several kilometers away from a target area and using its advanced optronics to identify its thermal imaging sensors to or regular daylight cameras that have the ability to zoom in and conduct auto track, are then would then attack with Hellfires or at very long range its 30 millimeter gun. In the case of the Russians, we're not seeing that. We're seeing the Russians come in very low and attack targets without the benefit of kind of that standoff ability and the use of those optronics. And it really kind of runs the gambit, unfortunately, for the Russians where they are having to deploy very closely, and they don't have the benefit of targeting pods or the ability to attack some of these Ukrainian targets at extreme standoff distance. And I think we're kind of seeing the cause and effect of that, and that is resulting in probably a higher loss of both Russian aircraft and even just ordinary ground systems as well. It just doesn't look like that the Russians have invested in some of these advanced optronics that really are required on the modern battlefield. And even if you look at the going back to the Javelin, that has a very advanced thermal imaging optic that can see great distance in the thermal spectrum, and it can be used not just as a platform to guide the Javelin missile to a specific target, but as I talked about before, it can also be used in scouting missions to identify Russian targets at extended ranges on the battlefield, which unfortunately right now we're just not seeing that same sort of capability in terms of the Russian military, even just the ordinary soldier on the ground. When you look at some of these, even these Russian higher end airborne forces, a lot of them don't even have optics on their rifles, and that befuddles me. In the modern era, you need some sort of ACOG or EOTech or aim point red dot sight that can help you engage targets quicker, faster, and more accurately without having to obtain a sight picture, which takes longer, obviously, with steel sights. And some of these engagements are spray and pray, and are just probably not very effective. But in the case of the Ukrainians, we're seeing some fairly modern rifles and sniper rifles being used with some more advanced optics than what even the Russian military was deploying. I think I watched one video of Russian forces being deployed to the Hostomel airport in the initial stages, and I don't think any of those guys, any of those those air assault forces, had optics on their rifles, and was just really strange to me, seeing high-tier, high-end Russian contract forces not having those optics, and it's unfortunate for the Russian military forces on the ground for those soldiers. But again, that's kind of the sum up for today. We're watching things very close south of Izium and other areas as well. I think this is going to make or break the Russian military campaign in Ukraine at this point, in terms of with what they're able to do within this what could become the Kramatorsk-Sloviansk pocket. Is it a pocket yet? It is not. Could it become a pocket for those Ukrainian forces trapped? It's very likely, highly probable. And I think all Russian assets right now are kind of focused on a military victory in this area where my cursor is circling. And it's unknown whether this operation will be successful. But I will say that if it is not, it does not bode well for Russian forces if they are unable to seize these areas, especially targets such as Severodonetsk, Lyman, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and if they are able to seize control of these areas, the Russians obviously, then that is going to open up for further offensive operations by the Russian Federation, and we could see, at least in the near term, the back of the Ukrainian forces, temporarily at least, get broken if the Russians are able to be successful. We're continuing to see the Russians attack Ukrainian rear areas with cruise missiles and tactical air efforts, and those are having an effect on the Ukrainian military. And as you watch Western media, you almost always see the Ukrainian military report on Russian casualties, and the Ukrainians never talk about their own casualties, which I guess is normal. They're fighting the propaganda war, and they're being relatively successful in that effort. And that does not mean the Russians are not taking casualties. They absolutely are, and I continue to hear about this whole Sun Tzu strategy in which the Russians intentionally did what they did north of Kiev. Russian supporters, you're going to have to come to grips with that eventually, I believe, and accept that that operation north and northwest of Kiev was not successful, and the Russian forces were forced to withdraw from that area. You can quote Sun Tzu all you want, but in the end, the outcome was not a desirable outcome for Russian forces in that area of operation. Again, as I talked about before, high risk, high reward. They had to try it. They tried it, wasn't successful. Now they've moved on with a different plan. Now, will this plan be successful? Hard to say at this point. It's going to be a tough. The Ukraine, with the support of the Western Alliance, is going to be a tough nut to crack, given the support that the West is providing to Ukraine at this point. I do believe that Russia is at some point going to have to announce full mobilization and put the entire national effort into this conflict at some point. And I'm not sure it's done that yet. And that is going to be a requirement probably for in-game success for the Russian Federation. But it's to remain to be seen if the Russians will actually do that or not. I wanted to mention one other thing. We've seen quite a lot of activity in terms of striking Dnipro, this area here. We have seen, in fact, the airport was apparently destroyed by recent Russian airstrikes. Not sure why that didn't occur earlier in the campaign. Kind of just one of these things about this conflict that kind of leaves me scratching my head at times. But you can clearly see Su-25 Frogfoots here at the Ukrainian air base prior. It's obviously has been used by Ukraine in terms of deploying tactical aircraft. So why it wasn't hit earlier and taken out earlier, who's to say? But there's a lot of things in this conflict that I quite often just scratch my head and I'm not fully understanding some of the processes that the Russians are deploying and why they're doing what they're doing in some cases, especially some of the ground issues. And maybe I'll get into that later, talk about that further. But that's all I have for today. Have a good day, everybody.